For 9 long years, Jack Travers lived alone, until one night in the dying glow of sunset, he saw her, a girl in chains. Her name was Nita, bruised, starving, and on her shoulder burned the mark of the U.S. Army. He gave her water, he broke her chains, and that's when the horizon came alive with fire, torches blazing in the dark. Soldiers. At their head, Captain Harlan, a man for whom an Apache life isn't worth a bullet, one chance to escape, and a dawn that will judge them all. The Texas sun was sinking low, bleeding crimson across the endless horizon when Jack Travers spotted something unusual near the dry creek bed. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a shimmer in the heat waves. But then it moved. A figure, stumbling, dragging something that glinted in the dying sun. Jack reined in his horse and squinted through the dust. Chains. The sound reached him next, metal clinking against bone with every faltering step, and then he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 20. Apache by her long black hair and copper skin, though her dress was torn to rags and streaked with blood and dirt. Shackles circled her wrists, raw and bruised, connected by a length of iron chain heavy enough to break a grown man. Her ankles bore the same cruel weight. Jack's first instinct was the same as any rancher's who had lived through the Apache raids. Keep his distance, hand near his colt. But the second instinct came from somewhere deeper, something older than hate or fear. A man doesn't ride past another soul in chains. He nudged his horse forward, slow and deliberate. "Miss," he called, voice carrying across the stillness. She froze, eyes wild like a cornered animal. In those dark eyes he saw something that stopped him cold. Not hatred, not defiance, fear, and behind it, a flicker of hope so faint it near broke his heart. Jack dismounted, keeping his hands where she could see them. "Easy," he said gently, like talking to a spooked horse. "I ain't here to hurt you." She swayed on her feet, too weak to run, too proud to fall. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper, rough from thirst. "Water." Jack's gut twisted. He pulled his canteen and held it out. She hesitated, then snatched it like a starving wolf, gulping until it was gone. He waited until she lowered it, breath coming hard, chains dragging at her wrists. That's when he saw the iron brand burned into her shoulder, Army property mark. His blood ran cold. A U.S. Army brand, on an Apache woman. Jack's mind raced. What in God's name had they done to her? And why? Only one thing was clear. If the Army had shackled her, they'd come looking. And if they found her here, on his land, they wouldn't ask questions before they shot him dead. But Jack couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing her like this. "Come on," he said, lifting her gently onto his horse. She didn't resist. Maybe she didn't have the strength. Maybe she trusted him, though God knew why. Jack swung up behind her, the chains cold against his hands as he took the reins. As the sun sank behind the hills, Jack Travers rode hard for his cabin, carrying a secret that could cost him his life. Because out there, beyond the horizon, the U.S. Army was on the move. And when they came, they'd bring hell with them. Jack reached his cabin just as the first stars pricked the Texas sky. He swung down, boots sinking into the hard-packed dirt, and eased the girl off the saddle. She was light, too light for someone her age. Shackles clanged against his stirrup as he lowered her gently to her feet. "Inside," he said softly, guiding her toward the cabin door. She stumbled but didn't fight, her bare feet leaving faint prints in the dust. When he opened the door, the smell of wood smoke and old leather greeted them both. Jack's place was small. One room, a stone hearth, a bed, and a table worn smooth by years of solitude. The girl hesitated at the threshold, like a wild creature unsure of a trap. Jack stepped back, giving her space. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's warm, and you'll get a meal." Slowly she crossed into the lamplight. That's when he saw the full truth of her condition. The skin on her wrists was raw and torn where the shackles bit deep. Her ankles weren't better, and the brand on her shoulder, God help him, it looked fresh. Whoever did this hadn't just chained her. They'd marked her like livestock. Jack fetched a bowl, filled it with water, and set it on the table. She sank into the chair with a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh, then began washing the grime from her face and hands. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if every muscle ached. When she looked up at him, her eyes caught the firelight. They weren't just dark. They were alive, burning with something fierce even through the exhaustion. "Name?" Jack asked, crouching to unlock the iron on her ankles. She stared at him like he'd spoken another tongue. He tried again, tapping his chest. "Jack!" Then he gestured to her. "You?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, in a voice soft as wind through mesquite, she said, "Nita." Her English was halting, but clear enough. Jack nodded slowly. Nita. It suited her. It meant, what was it? He thought he'd heard it once. Water. Or something close. The locks were rusted, but gave way under pressure. When the last shackle clattered to the floor, she rubbed her wrists, wincing. Jack turned to stoke the fire, but a sound outside froze him cold. Hoofbeats. Not one horse. Not two. A dozen, maybe more. Coming fast, the rhythm sharp and sure as marching drums. Jack's hand shot to his Winchester. His mind raced. If those were soldiers, and God help him, who else could it be? They were close enough to smell the smoke from his chimney. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Torchlight flickered on the far ridge. The army had found her, and they were bringing hell to his door. Jack's breath fogged the glass as he stared through the narrow crack in the shutter. Torches bobbed on the horizon like fireflies in hell, the light weaving through the mesquite as the riders closed in. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. Soldiers. A dozen at least, maybe more. He cursed under his breath and stepped back from the window, heart pounding like a war drum. Nita sat at the table, her thin frame hunched as she nibbled the bread he'd given her, unaware of the storm about to break over them. Or maybe not unaware. Her eyes tracked him, sharp and wary, as if she sensed the danger outside. Jack snatched his Winchester from the wall, checking the chamber. 7 rounds. Not near enough if those torches belonged to what he thought. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside her. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice low but firm. "Men are coming, soldiers. If they find you here, it won't go well for either of us." Her eyes flickered. Fear, then something else. Resignation, maybe. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "They kill me." Her voice was ragged, broken by more than thirst. Jack froze. "Kill you? For what?" She didn't answer, just gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Jack wanted to shake the truth out of her, but time was bleeding away like water and sand. The hoofbeats were louder now, closer. He could hear the jingle of bridles, the low murmur of men's voices. They weren't even trying to hide. Jack's mind split in 2. One half screamed the sensible thing. Turn her over. Tell them she stumbled onto his land. Wash his hands clean. The other half, the part that had carried him through Comanche raids and the war between the states, snarled like a wolf. "No man chains a woman like an animal. Not while I draw breath." "Down," he said, jerking his chin toward the trapdoor by the hearth. His storm cellar wasn't much, but it was dark and deep. She hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face as if weighing whether to trust him. Outside, a voice rang through the night. "Travers! Jack Travers! Come out now, or we come in shootin'." Jack's stomach dropped. They knew his name. Nita flinched at the shout, then scrambled toward the cellar without another word. Jack yanked the trap open, helped her down the ladder, and shoved the door shut just as fists hammered against the front door. "Travers!" The voice was closer now, full of steel. "Open up! By order of the United States Army." Jack drew a breath, rolled his shoulders, and slid the Winchester into his hands. If the army wanted to fight tonight, they'd pick the wrong cabin. The pounding on the door shook the cabin like thunder. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and forced his voice steady. "Hold your horses! I ain't deaf!" He slid the Winchester under the edge of the table but kept his Colt loose in its holster. No sense starting trouble before he knew which way the wind blew. The door shuddered under one last hammering blow before swinging wide on its hinges. Cold night air swept in, carrying the smell of horse sweat, gun oil, and rain-damp earth. And behind that smell came the men. A dozen soldiers filled the doorway and the yard beyond, silhouettes against the torchlight. Their uniforms were mud-smeared, but the brass buttons still gleamed. The man at the front was tall, square-jawed, his blue coat marked by captain's bars, and a face carved from stone. His eyes swept the cabin like a hawk hunting mice. "Travers," he said, his voice flat, dangerous. "You've got something that belongs to the United States Army." Jack leaned against the table like a man with nothing to hide. "Funny," he drawled. "Last I checked, I didn't own a thing worth Uncle Sam riding half the territory for." The captain stepped forward, spurs jingling, his men fanning out like wolves circling a steer. "I'm not here for jokes. A prisoner escaped custody this morning. Apache. Female. Dangerous." He let the word hang heavy in the air. "Seen anyone?" Jack let his gaze drift past the captain to the torches swaying in the darkness, then back again. "Only folks I've seen tonight are the ones tracking mud into my cabin." A muscle ticked in the captain's jaw. He took another step, close enough that Jack caught the stink of whiskey on his breath. "Don't lie to me, Travers. We tracked her this far. She's close. You hand her over, and maybe we forget you were helping a fugitive." Jack felt his gut twist. Fugitive? What in hell could an Apache girl do to make the army chain her like a dog? He kept his voice lazy, almost bored. "You sure you boys didn't lose her out in that big wide desert? Plenty of empty land out there for someone to vanish." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm playing games, rancher?" He raised his hand and two soldiers pushed past Jack like he was a tumbleweed. They started tearing through his cabin, kicking at the bed, yanking open cupboards, even checking under the table where Jack's Winchester gleamed in the shadows. Every nerve in Jack's body screamed to draw and start blasting. But one look at those torches outside told him how that ended. 12 rifles against one man. He'd die. And Nita with him, so he forced himself still, his hands loose at his sides, while the soldiers ripped his life apart. "Not here, sir," one of them muttered after a minute. The captain's eyes slid back to Jack, cold as river ice. "If she's not here, then you won't mind us staying the night. Keep looking come morning." Jack's heart sank. If they stayed, they'd find the cellar before dawn. And when they did, hell would ride. Jack's pulse thudded like a war drum as the captain's words settled like a noose around his neck. Stay the night. Hell, they'd strip this place down to the nails before morning. And the first thing they'd find would be that trapdoor by the hearth. The captain's boots creaked on the plank floor as he prowled closer, his shadow cutting long in the lamplight. "You don't mind, do you, Travers?" His tone was smooth, but his eyes were hard. Be a shame if a loyal citizen refused the U.S. Army. Folks might wonder where his loyalties lie. Jack forced a slow smile, even as his mind spun. "Don't see as I've got much choice, Captain." "Harlan!" The officer snapped, chin high like a man used to obedience. "And you don't. We'll stable the horses in your corral. Men will bunk here. You'll make room." He flicked 2 fingers, and his soldiers started hauling in bedrolls like they owned the place. Jack's gut tightened. The storm cellar was 5 feet from the hearth, barely hidden under a threadbare rug. All it would take was one boot heel catching that edge, and Nita was as good as dead. He stole a glance at the trap door. It looked solid enough in the dim light for now. Harlan stepped close, lowering his voice so only Jack could hear. "She's not just a squaw, Travers. She's property of the United States, and property that talks too much." His lips curled in a cold smile. "Help us, and maybe there's a bounty in it for you." Jack felt something hot coil in his chest. Property, like she was a mule or a rifle. He kept his face flat, but his fingers itched for his Colt. "Can't help what I ain't seen," he said, slow and steady. Harlan studied him a long moment, then turned away with a grunt. "Search outside," he barked to his men. "Check the outbuildings." Boots clumped out into the night, leaving 2 soldiers inside. Jack moved to the hearth, pretending to stir the fire, while his mind raced like a river in flood. He had 3 options: kill them all and die before dawn, betray the girl, or pull off the craziest gamble of his life. The trapdoor creaked under the heat. From below, Jack thought he heard the faintest sound. Metal clinking. Shackles. Nita was awake, listening, waiting. And then, through the open doorway, came a sound that made every head snap up. Another set of hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. Not soldiers. Someone else was coming. The hoofbeats grew louder, pounding across the hardpan like distant thunder rolling closer. Every soldier in Harlan's squad stiffened. Rifles were snatched from doorframes, boots scraped as men shifted toward the entrance. Even Harlan's calm veneer cracked as he turned sharply toward the sound. "Who in hell?" he muttered, striding to the doorway just as a dark figure on horseback burst from the shadows of the mesquite. The rider pulled up hard, the horse sliding in a spray of dust, nostrils flaring steam in the cold night air. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a trail coat black with rain and dust. His hat brim hid most of his face, but what little Jack saw was rough and scarred by wind and time. Across his chest hung a rifle on a worn leather sling, and at his hip gleamed a Colt that looked like it had seen more than its share of killing. "Evening," the stranger said, voice low and edged with steel. "Hope I ain't riding in on a bad time." Harlan stepped forward, hand resting on his sidearm. "State your name and business." The stranger's head tilted slightly. "Funny thing about names," he said, swinging a leg over and dropping to the ground. His boots hit the dirt with a solid thud. "They don't matter half as much as intentions. And mine," he smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it, "are good if I'm not crossed." Jack felt every muscle in his body coil tight. He'd seen men like this before, gunfighters who walked with death like an old friend. And right now, this one stood between Harlan and a yard full of jittery soldiers itching for a reason to shoot. Harlan squared his shoulders. "This is U.S. Army business. If you're looking for whiskey or cards, you best ride to the next town." The stranger's eyes flicked past Harlan, into the cabin, then back again. Jack caught the glance. He knows. Damn it all, he knows someone's in here. "Funny," the man drawled. "I ain't thirsty. And I sure as hell ain't looking for cards." He took a slow step closer, boots crunching in the dirt. "What I'm looking for is a girl." Every man froze. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs like a battering ram. Harlan's voice came low and dangerous. "You'd best explain that real careful, friend. Because if you're talking about our prisoner—" "I ain't your friend," the stranger cut in, his tone flat as a tombstone. His hand brushed the Colt at his side like it was part of him. "And I reckon the girl ain't your prisoner." The night seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the torches hissed in the wind. Inside, Jack's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, every nerve screaming for the fight that was about to blow like dry lightning. Then Nita's voice, soft, tremulous, rose from the storm cellar, one word in Apache, and the stranger answered. The sound of that Apache word, soft, raw, almost a sob, froze Jack where he stood. He didn't know what it meant, but the stranger sure did. His hard jaw loosened, and for the first time, his voice softened like leather worn smooth. "Yeah, Nita," he said, answering in the same tongue, low and quick, a handful of words that rolled like wind through canyon walls. Jack couldn't make sense of them, but Nita's muffled reply came swift and urgent, desperation clinging to every syllable. Harlan whipped around, his face twisting. "You son of a—" His hand went for his sidearm, but the stranger was already moving. Steel hissed like a rattler's warning as his Colt cleared leather and cocked in one fluid motion. "Easy, soldier," the man said, his voice calm but colder than the iron in his fist. "You twitch that finger, and you'll be spitting blood before your men draw breath." The air in the cabin turned thick, heavy with the stink of sweat and powder. Every soldier froze, hands hovering near rifles but not daring to move. They'd seen that draw. They knew this wasn't some saddle tramp bluffing for bravado. This was a man who'd killed before and would again without blinking. Harlan's jaw worked like a man chewing gravel. "You got nerve," he said, his voice low and shaking with barely checked rage. "But you just signed your death warrant." The stranger's eyes never left his. "You first, Captain." Jack stepped in fast, voice sharp. "Enough." His palms were out, but his mind was spinning like a busted wagon wheel. If lead started flying now, Nita was dead for sure, and so was he. "Harlan, put it down. Ain't no call to turn my floor into a graveyard." Harlan sneered, but his pistol stayed half raised. The stranger didn't even blink, his finger resting easy on the trigger like it belonged there. Then the silence split with a sound that made every man stiffen. The faint scrape of wood. The trapdoor. Nita was climbing out. Her chains clinked as she rose into the lamplight, dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, her wrists raw and bruised. And when her eyes locked on the stranger, the fire in them burned away every trace of fear. She spoke one word in Apache, fierce, commanding. He nodded slowly. "I told you I'd find you," he said in English this time, his gaze cut to Harlan. "And I aim to take her back. Alive." Jack could feel the whole room teetering on a knife's edge. Harlan men shifted near the walls, eyes flicking between their captain and the stranger, sweat glistening in the lamplight. Outside, horses stamped nervously, sensing the storm before the thunder. Nita stood barefoot on the planks, chains dragging like the tail of some wounded beast. Her gaze never left the stranger. Her lips moved in Apache again, sharp, urgent. The words cracked through the silence like sparks from a flint. Harlan barked a harsh laugh, though it sounded forced. "Well, ain't this a sweet reunion? But she's army property, and by God, I'll—" He didn't finish. The stranger's Colt roared, and Harlan's hat spun off his head as the bullet punched through the brim an inch above his skull. The captain froze, his face pale as bone, breath coming fast. "That's your one warning," the stranger said, his voice quiet enough to make it worse. "Next one ain't for the hat." Rifles jerked up. The room exploded in motion. Boots scraping, metal clanging, curses cutting the air like knives. Jack didn't think, didn't plan. He dove sideways, snatching his Winchester from beneath the table. The butt hit his shoulder just as the first real shot cracked the night. Glass shattered in the window. Smoke filled the cabin in a choking wave. Harlan men fired wild, their aim broken by panic in the flicker of lamplight. The stranger moved like a ghost, his Colt spitting fire, each shot clean, measured. One soldier screamed and crashed into the doorframe. Another crumpled near the hearth. Jack racked the Winchester and sent a slug through the window, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. A man outside howled. The yard erupted in chaos. Horses shrieking, boots pounding, more shots splitting the dark. Through it all, Nita crouched low behind the table, her chains rattling like a death knell. Jack's gut twisted. If a stray bullet hit her now, no, he wouldn't let that happen. He vaulted toward her, grabbed her arm, and yanked her toward the trapdoor. "Down," he barked. She hesitated, eyes flashing toward the stranger as if unwilling to leave him. "Go," the gunfighter snarled, never breaking his aim. "I'll cover." Jack didn't argue. He shoved Nita into the cellar just as another rifle cracked from the doorway, splinters stinging his face. The stranger spun, dropped the shooter with a single shot, then swung back to Jack. "Get her out the back," he said between gunfire. "You got a horse saddled?" Jack nodded once. The dun gelding. "Good. Ride hard south. I'll draw 'em." Jack's blood ran cold. "You won't make it." The stranger smiled. A grim slash of white in the smoke. "Wasn't planning to." Jack's heart hammered like a war drum as the stranger's words sank in. Wasn't planning to. Men didn't talk like that unless they'd already shaken hands with death. Smoke curled in greasy fingers toward the rafters, stinging his eyes. Through it, the gunfighter stood like a black figure cut from iron, his Colt spitting fire in sharp, deliberate bursts. Outside, Harlan roared orders, his voice hoarse with fury. "Flank the house. Burn it if you have to." Shadows lunged across the yard as soldiers scattered, rifles flashing. A torch sailed through the night and landed in the corral hay with a soft whump. Flames clawed upward like hungry wolves. Jack cursed under his breath. His ranch was going up in smoke, and so was his life if he didn't move. He dropped into the cellar, grabbed Nita by the arm, and hauled her up into the choking heat. Her eyes were wide, reflecting firelight, and when he yanked her toward the back door, her chains dragged like anchors. "Damn these irons," Jack muttered, scanning for a tool. His eyes fell on the old wood axe near the kindling box. One swing shattered the chain between her ankles, another split the link on her wrists. The cuffs stayed, but at least she could run. "Go!" he hissed, shoving her toward the rear exit. The night outside was chaos. Torchlight leaping like demons, horses screaming, bullets whining through the dark. Jack grabbed his Winchester and shoved Nita low against the cabin wall. The stranger appeared in the doorway behind them, silhouette framed by fire. He'd slung a fallen soldier's rifle over his back, another pistol now gripped in his left hand. His voice was calm as Sunday prayer. "Corral's burning. You got 2 minutes, maybe less." Jack's jaw clenched. "You ain't dying here alone." The stranger's grin was all teeth. "Ain't alone yet, rancher, but if you're hell-bent on sticking with me, best start shooting." As if on cue, 3 soldiers rounded the cabin corner, rifles raised. Jack fired first, the Winchester bucking like a bronc. One man folded, another staggered into the dirt. The stranger finished the third with a shot so fast it looked like sleight of hand. "South Ridge!" the gunfighter barked, grabbing Nita by the arm and shoving her toward Jack. "Take her and ride like the devil's on your heels, because he is." "And you?" Jack demanded, breath ragged. The stranger spun, eyes blazing under the brim of his hat. "I ain't through collecting debts." Then he stepped back into the flames and gun smoke, and the world exploded in fire. Jack hauled Nita toward the South Ridge, lungs burning from smoke and fear. The night was alive with chaos. Men shouting, horses screaming, the sharp crack of rifles slicing through the roar of flames. Behind them, his cabin was a torch against the sky, black smoke curling into the stars. The gelding stood where Jack had left him, tethered near the lean-to, eyes rolling white at the scent of fire. He untied the rope with fumbling hands and swung into the saddle in one fluid motion. "Up!" he barked, yanking Nita by the wrist. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, glancing back toward the cabin where the stranger fought like a man carved from steel. "Nita!" Jack roared. "Move!" She obeyed, vaulting up behind him with surprising strength for someone who'd been shackled hours ago. Her arms locked tight around his waist as he dug his heels into the gelding's ribs. The horse surged forward, hooves drumming a desperate rhythm across the hardpan. Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets whined past Jack's ears like angry hornets. One thunked into the saddle horn, spraying splinters across his thigh. He bent low over the horse's neck, teeth clenched against the sting. "Hold on!" he shouted over the thunder of hooves. They plunged through a stand of mesquite, branches clawing at their clothes. Behind them, voices rose in fury. "South! They're heading for the ridge!" Harlan men were fast, too fast. The glow of torches flickered through the trees, and Jack knew the army's mounts would outlast his tired gelding on open ground. "Ridge," he muttered, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The land dipped and swelled like a sleeping beast, and somewhere beyond those folds lay the old creek bed. If they could hit it, they might vanish, at least for a while. Nita clung tighter, her breath hot against his neck. He felt her whisper before he heard it. A single word in Apache, then another, sharper, urgent. Jack didn't understand, but the fear in her tone twisted his gut. He risked a glance back. What he saw made his blood run cold. Harlan was coming hard, spurs flashing, his black horse eating up the ground like a devil from hell. And in his hand gleamed something that wasn't regulation, a cavalry saber, curved and cruel in the firelight. Jack leaned low, urging the gelding into one last burst of speed. But the ridge loomed ahead like a black wall, and Harlan was closing the gap with murder in his eyes. The ridge rose sharp and jagged against the stars, a wall of black rock clawing at the sky. Jack's lungs burned like fire as the gelding thundered uphill, muscles bunching under the strain. Loose stones clattered down the slope, rolling into the darkness below. Behind them, the pounding of hooves grew louder. Closer, Harlan curses ripping through the night like the crack of a whip. "Faster, boy!" Jack hissed, spurring the gelding hard. The horse lunged forward, foam flying from its bit. Nita clung to him like a shadow, her breath hot against his neck. He felt her muscles tighten as she risked a glance back. Then her voice cut sharp in Apache, a warning that needed no translation. Jack twisted in the saddle just as steel hissed through the air. Harlan was on them, his saber flashing like white fire in the torchlight. Jack ducked low, the blade screaming over his head so close it trimmed a lock of his hair. He swung the Winchester up one-handed, fired blind over his shoulder. The blast split the night. Harlan's horse reared, screaming, but the captain clung like a tick, spurring it savagely as sparks showered from iron shoes striking stone. Jack jammed the Winchester back under his arm and drove the gelding harder, the ridge crest looming like salvation. Beyond it lay the old creek bed, dry this time of year, choked with brush and shadow. If they could make it, they'd vanish like smoke. "Hold on!" Jack bellowed as the horse lunged over the top. They plunged down the far side, stones skittering under pounding hooves, gravity yanking at his guts. Nita's fingers dug into his coat like talons. Behind them came Harlan, riding hell for leather, saber flashing wild as a comet. The slope ended in a bone-white stretch of dry riverbed, tangled with scrub and thorn. Jack hauled the gelding hard left, diving into the gully just as Harlan cleared the ridge behind them, bellowing like a man gone mad. For a heartbeat, the world was all thunder and shadow, the smell of sweat and blood and gun smoke choking the air. Then, above it all, came a sound that froze Jack's blood colder than any night wind. A bugle, clear and sharp, rolling across the darkness like doom on a silver thread. Reinforcements. Harlan wasn't alone anymore. The bugle's cry cut through the canyon like a knife of sound, echoing off the ridges in mocking clarity. Jack's heart plunged. That call wasn't for retreat. It was for encirclement. The army wasn't chasing anymore. They were closing the trap. The gelding pounded through the dry creek bed, hooves kicking up clouds of dust and brittle weeds. Jack bent low over its neck, eyes darting for cover. Thorn brush clawed at his legs. Mesquite trees hunched like dark sentinels along the banks, their twisted limbs throwing broken shadows. Behind him, Harlan was a demon in pursuit, his saber now forgotten for a cult navy that barked fire into the night. A bullet shrieked past Jack's ear, another ripped a splinter from the riverbank, inches from Nita's head. She didn't scream, didn't flinch, just clung to him tighter, her breath hot and ragged. Jack cut hard left, where the creek bed split into a narrow draw. The gelding stumbled, nearly pitched forward, then found its stride again. Jack risked a glance back. Harlan followed relentless, teeth bared in a wolf's grin. And beyond him, across the rim of the ridge, torchlight bloomed like a field of angry stars. Dozens of riders, the rest of Harlan men, pouring in like floodwater. God help me, Jack thought. He wasn't just running for his life now. He was running for hers too. A girl chained and branded like cattle, hunted by men who'd sworn to the same flag he once fought for. The draw deepened. its walls closing in like the jaws of a trap. Jack yanked the reins, pulling up hard, where a tumble of boulders blocked the way forward. The gelding skidded to a halt, sides heaving. There was nowhere left to run. Harlan laughter floated down the gully as his horse clattered into view. He reined up slow, savoring the moment, pistol glinting in his fist. "End of the trail, Travers!" he shouted, his voice rich with triumph. "Step aside, and maybe I'll let you keep breathing." Jack slid off the gelding, pulling Nita down behind him. His Winchester came up smooth, steady as a hanging judge. "Reckon you'll have to earn it," he said, his voice low and hard as iron. Harlan's grin widened. "So be it." The night held its breath. Then came another sound, a soft scrape on stone above them. Jack's gut clenched. He looked up. A silhouette crouched on the rim, black against the stars. A rifle glinted in his hands. The stranger's silhouette loomed on the ridge, his rifle cradled like a serpent ready to strike. Moonlight flashed on steel as he took aim, his stance carved from stone. Harlan noticed him a heartbeat too late. The first shot cracked like thunder, and Harlan's pistol spun from his hand, clattering into the rocks. His horse reared, screaming, nearly unseating him. Jack didn't waste the gift. He leveled the Winchester and sent a slug snapping into the dirt at Harlan's feet. "Drop the saber," he growled. Harlan froze, chest heaving, eyes blazing with hate. For a second, Jack thought the fool might try it anyway, charge bare-handed and die with his teeth bared. Then, slow as sap in winter, the captain let the curved blade slide from his fingers. It hit the rocks with a hiss, like a rattler in the dark. Above, the stranger chambered another round, his voice carrying clear and cold. "You should have killed me when you had the chance, Harlan." Recognition flickered across Harlan's face, shock first, then fury. "Kane Holt," he spat. "Thought the devil claimed you years back." "Not yet," Kane said, and the words were soft as death. Before Harlan could answer, the canyon lit with fire. Rifles cracked from the ridge as Harlan men swept in, torches blazing. Bullets screamed like angry bees, sparking off stone, chewing splinters from the rocks near Jack's head. "Down!" Jack roared, shoving Nita flat against the riverbed as lead sang over them. Kane's rifle barked again, dropping one torchbearer from his saddle in a whirl of sparks. Then another. But for every man that fell, 3 more closed in, their muzzles spitting flame into the night. The gelding shrieked as a round tore through its flank, pitching sideways in a spray of dust. Jack rolled clear, yanking Nita with him, heart pounding like a war drum. "We can't stay pinned here," he shouted toward the ridge. Kane's answer was another shot, another soldier tumbling headlong into the dark. "Working on it!" Harlan scrambled for cover behind a boulder, his voice booming like cannon fire. "Burn him out! I want that girl alive!" Jack's gut went cold. Alive? For what? He didn't have time to wonder. He racked the Winchester, teeth clenched, as torchlight licked closer and the canyon walls closed like the jaws of hell. The canyon roared with gunfire, echoes slamming against stone like war drums. Jack slammed a fresh round into his Winchester, breath burning in his chest. Beside him, Nita crouched low, eyes fierce in the flicker of torches. Above, Kane fired again, cutting another torch from its bearer and sending a rider tumbling into the dust. But for every man that fell, 2 more poured down the ridge, rifles blazing. The air stank of powder and blood, and Jack knew one truth clear as daylight. They couldn't win this fight by standing. His gaze darted to the creek's far bend, a jagged split where black rocks swallowed the moonlight, a narrow gap. If they could reach it, maybe they'd vanish before Harlan men tightened the noose. Jack grabbed Nita's arm, his voice a growl over the storm of lead. "See that cut? You run when I say, and don't you stop for hell or heaven." She met his eyes, breath ragged, and nodded once. Fear burned there, but so did something harder. Trust. "Kane." Jack bellowed toward the ridge. "We're moving!" The gunfighter's voice drifted down like smoke. "About damn time. I'll give you your window." A rifle cracked from above. Then another. Then a third in quick rhythm. Cain was emptying his repeater, like a man possessed, raining death on Harlan line. Soldiers scattered for cover, their torches spinning wild. The canyon bloomed with chaos. Jack seized the moment. He surged to his feet, yanking Nita with him, and sprinted toward the gap. Bullets hissed past like angry hornets, stone chips stinging his face. But he didn't slow. Behind them, Cain's last round barked, and then the boom of his Colt as he switched to steel and fire, buying them seconds with blood. They hit the gap and plunged into darkness, rock walls scraping their shoulders. The passage twisted, narrow as a coffin, before spilling into a hidden wash where moonlight gleamed on open desert. Jack whirled, breath tearing his lungs. "Cain!" A shadow detached from the dark and strode toward them, smoke curling from his Colt. Cain's face was pale, his hat gone, blood streaking his sleeve. But his grin was wolf-sharp. "Thought you'd run off without me?" he rasped. Jack almost laughed, but the sound died when a bugle call split the night behind them. Reinforcements. Close. Too close. Harlan wasn't quitting. Cain jerked his head toward the south horizon, where the desert rolled endless under a sky of burning stars. "Mount up," he said. "We got one shot left to live, and I ain't planning to waste it." They ran for the shadows. Behind them, the canyon burned like the gates of hell. The desert stretched before them like an ocean of silver under the cold glow of the moon. No roads, no fences, just sand, scrub, and the whisper of wind through the mesquite. Jack's boots hit the earth hard as he yanked the gelding saddlebag free, useless now with the horse dead in the canyon. Cain was already moving, blood slicking his arm, his breath ragged but his will sharp as ever. He led them to a pair of shadowed shapes tethered near a rocky outcrop, two riderless army horses left behind when their owners chased into the gap. Luck or providence, Jack didn't care. "Up!" Cain barked, shoving Nita toward the nearest mount. She climbed like a cat, despite the iron cuffs still biting her wrists. Jack swung into the other, cinching the reins tight. Cain slapped the rump of Jack's horse and vaulted up behind Nita, his Colt steady in his good hand. "Ride south," he snarled. "Don't stop for hell itself." They kicked hard, and the desert leapt beneath them. The horses surged into a pounding gallop, hooves striking sparks on stone. Behind them, the bugles screamed again, shrill, furious. Torchlight flickered at the canyon mouth like fireflies in a devil's jar. Harlan's voice rose above it all, raw with rage. "After them! Bring me that girl alive!" Bullets spat sparks off the rocks as the chase poured into the open. Jack bent low over his horse's neck, wind clawing at his face, lungs burning with the taste of gun smoke. Beside him, Nita clung to Cain like her soul depended on it, which it did. The land opened wide, a sea of silver dunes and black scrub. No cover now, just speed and distance. Jack risked a glance back and saw a river of fire sweeping across the desert. Torches flaring, rifles glinting. They were gaining. "Cain!" Jack roared over the thunder of hooves. "We can't outrun 'em." "Don't need to," Cain growled. "Just need the horizon." And then Jack saw it, a faint glow far ahead, low and warm against the steel-blue dark. Firelight, but not torches. Campfires. Many of them. Nita saw it too. Her voice broke in a cry, fierce and bright, and she shouted a string of words in Apache that rang like music. Cain's grin split his blood-streaked face. "Told you I'd bring you home." They rode like the devil chased them, and maybe he did. But the fires grew larger, closer, until shadows rose from the earth like spirits called from the grave. Riders. Dozens of them. Painted faces, feathers flashing in the moonlight, rifles glinting like the teeth of wolves. Apache warriors. The desert thunder shifted. No longer pursuit. Charge. Harlan men faltered as the war cry ripped the night wide open, echoing from the stars themselves. The two tides met in a crash of sound and fury, and Jack felt the ground shake under the hooves of vengeance. Cain hauled his horse sideways, dragging Nita into the circle of her people. Hands reached for her, voices rising in a chorus of fierce joy. Jack swung down too, his legs trembling as Apache warriors surged past like a river of flame, smashing Harlan line to kindling. In the chaos, Jack saw Harlan one last time. Hatless, saber flashing, his roar cut short by a shot Cain placed clean through his chest. The captain toppled into the dust, his dream of chains and power dying with him. And then it was over. Silence fell heavy as the dawn bleeding red across the horizon. Smoke curled in the chill air. Horses snorted, stamping in the trampled earth. Nita stood free in the pale light, iron still circling her wrists but her back straight, her eyes shining like the morning star. She turned to Jack, then to Cain, and spoke one word in English, soft as wind through the cottonwoods. Home. Jack swallowed hard, something tight in his throat. Cain clapped him on the shoulder, his grin tired but fierce. Reckon you earned a friend for life, Travers. Jack looked east, where the sun burned over the wild land. Beyond it lay nothing but sky and tomorrow. He breathed deep, tasting smoke, blood, and freedom. Yeah, he said, voice low and certain. Feels like a good day to start living again. And under that endless sky, with the war cries fading and the sun climbing, Jack rode on into the kind of dawn men wrote songs about.